and the two young ladies asked him who was the unknown woman. Mr. Howland said that she was Madam Glynn from London. Madam Glynn took her stand in a corner of the room, holding a roll of music stiffly before her, and from time to time changing the direction of her startled gaze. The shadow took her faded dress into shelter, but fell revengefully into the little cup behind her collarbone. The noise of the hall became more audible. The first tenor and the baritone arrived together. They were both well-dressed, stout, and complacent, and they brought a breath of opulence among the company. Mrs. Kearney brought her daughter over to them and talked to them amiably. She wanted to be on good terms with them, but while she strove to be polite, her eyes followed Mr. Holohan in his limping and devious courses. As soon as she could, she excused herself and went out after him.
Mr. Holohan, I want to speak to you for a moment, she said.
They went down to a discreet part of the corridor. Mrs. Kearney asked him when was her daughter going to be paid. Mr. Holohan said that Mr. Fitzpatrick had charge of that. Mrs. Kearney said that she didn't know anything about Mr. Fitzpatrick. Her daughter had signed a contract for 8 guineas, and she would have to be paid. Mr. Holohan said that it wasn't his business.
Why isn't it your business?
Asked Mrs. Kearney.
Didn't you yourself bring her the contract? Anyway, if it's not your business, it's my business, and I mean to see to it.
You'd better speak to Mr. Fitzpatrick,
said Mr. Holohan distantly.
I don't know anything about Mr. Fitzpatrick,
repeated Mrs. Kearney.
I have my contract, and I intend to see that it is carried out.
When she came back to the dressing room, her cheeks were slightly suffused. The room was lively. 2 men in outdoor dress had taken possession of the fireplace and were chatting familiarly with Miss Healy and the baritone. They were the Freeman man and Mr. O'Madden Burke. The Freeman man had come in to say that he could not wait for the concert, as he had to report the lecture which an American priest was giving in the Mansion House. He said they were to leave the report for him at the Freeman office, and he would see that it went in. He was a grey-haired man with a plausible voice and careful manners. He held an extinguished cigar in his hand, and the aroma of cigar smoke floated near him. He had not intended to stay a moment, because concerts and artistes bored him considerably, but he remained leaning against the mantelpiece. Miss Healy stood in front of him, talking and laughing. He was old enough to suspect one reason for her politeness, but young enough in spirit to turn the moment to account. The warmth, fragrance, and colour of her body appealed to his senses. He was pleasantly conscious that the bosom which he saw rise and fall slowly beneath him rose and fell at that moment for him, that the laughter and fragrance and wilful glances were his tribute,